In today's video, I am going to explain muscle anatomy that does posterior tilt of pelvis. Posterior tilt is pelvis moves this way. It's like you tuck in pelvis posterior way. Easy way to memorize is pubis goes up and posterior part of pelvis goes down. This is posterior tilt. For another video, I explained muscle anatomy for anterior tilt. I said anterior hip muscles and posterior muscles, which is back muscles, do anterior tilt. Posterior tilt muscles are opposite. Posterior hip muscles and anterior core muscles, which is abdominal muscles. Posterior hip muscles and abdominal muscles. Let me explain from hip muscles first. There are two big muscle groups of posterior tilt. What is one muscle? What is first muscle? First muscle is this one. This is gluteus maximus. Gluteus maximus, that of course attaches to posterior part of pelvis. Then next one is kind of a muscle group. That's this one. This is hamstrings. There are three muscles in hamstrings, correct? First one is biceps femoris. Next one is semimembranosus. Third one is semitendinosus. These three muscles together, that is hamstrings. Yep, hamstrings also does posterior tilt. Why is that? Because attachment of hamstrings is ischial tuberosity. Ischial tuberosity is part of ischium, that is pelvis. Imagine ischial tuberosity is about here, then hamstrings originate from this bony part. What if hamstrings pulls pelvis this way? In this case, then pelvis goes posterior tilt. It's like gluteus maximus. Gluteus maximus is here. When gluteus maximus pulls pelvis this way, indeed, this vector of force brings pelvis to posterior tilt. There's another main function of these two muscles. That is hip extension. Gluteus maximus, of course, strong hip extensor. Hamstrings, of course, strong hip extensor. When these two muscles contract, that brings femur this way. That is kind of a superior way, right? When these muscles contract in a kind of superior way, of course, that brings femur to superior way, posterior way. However, what if they contrast kind of inferior way? Then this vector of force brings pelvis to posterior tilt. Hip extensors are also hip posterior tilt muscles. I have to say that again. Hip extensor is also for hip posterior tilt muscles. This is very important to know. On the other hand, how about anterior tilt muscles? They are same time hip flexors. Anterior tilt muscles are also hip flexor muscles. Okay? Hip extensor muscles are posterior tilt muscles. It's important to distinguish these two characteristics. Very important. Where gluteus maximus and hamstrings are main muscle for posterior tilt. Then there are few kind of minor muscles for posterior tilt. Alright, I want to explain muscles on lateral part. This is where ilium is. This is iliac crest. There are two muscles kind of run on anterior part and posterior part of pelvis. Imagine this blue dot indicates a muscle. Then deep to this muscle, there is one more muscle like this. Blue dots indicate gluteus medius. Yellow dots indicate gluteus minimus. Okay, gluteus medius and gluteus minimus kind of run on anterior part and posterior part like this. I want to focus on posterior part. posterior fiber. When posterior part contracts, that brings pelvis posterior tilt. And same time, posterior fiber is also hip extensor. That is what I just said, right? On the other hand, anterior fiber does anterior tilt. Plus, anterior fiber is also for hip flexor. Very important, don't you think? So, for posterior tilt, that is posterior fiber of gluteus medius and gluteus minimus. These two guys are so important for pelvis and hip movement. Well, these are pretty much it. These are main posterior tilt muscles for hip muscles. Gluteus maximus, hamstrings, gluteus medius, gluteus minimus, posterior fiber. Now let me explain abdominal muscle. Do you remember when abdominal muscles contract, that brings pubis this way, superior way. This vector force creates rotational movement, that is for posterior tilt. So let me explain abdominal muscles. What is the most famous abdominal muscle? That is rectus abdominis. What is the main function of this muscle? That is trunk flexion. Trunk flexion. Okay, this is not hip flexion. This is trunk flexion. But trunk flexion is this way. It's like you do sit-up movement. You look down. This is trunk flexion. How about when your rectus abdominis contracts this way? This superior direction creates pelvis for posterior tilt. This is what I was talking about. So, rectus abdominis, strong core flexion muscle. Same time, when this muscle contracts this way, this creates posterior tilt of pelvis. So basically, abdominal muscles which do trunk flexion do posterior tilt. Alright, any other muscles? Here are two muscles. On this side, this is external oblique. And on this side, I'm showing you internal oblique. Okay, external oblique and internal oblique. Internal oblique is deep to external oblique. On this side, there's deep to external oblique. And on this side, external oblique is superficial from internal oblique. Of course, these muscles are on both sides. When both sides of these muscles contract, that does trunk flexion. That means these guys can do posterior tilt of pelvis. Both sides is key terminology. When one side of these muscles contract, that does slightly different functions. They do side bend and rotation. When both sides contract, that do trunk flexion. It's important to distinguish. Anyhow, abdominal muscles do trunk flexion plus posterior tilt. Rectus abdominis and external oblique, internal oblique. Okay, quick review. Abdominal muscles contraction brings core to flexion. Same time that can bring core pelvis to this way, this posterior tilt movement. So basically, posterior hip muscles and abdominal muscles do posterior tilt. What about anterior tilt? They are anterior hip muscles and back muscles. When back muscles contract this way, this vector brings pelvis to anterior tilt. So basically, pink area is for anterior tilt. Yellow area is for posterior tilt. Knowing this anatomy is very important for various things. It's important for training, it's important for athletic movement, Pilates, yoga, dance, so many things. I hope today's anatomy helps for your career. If you liked today's video, please hit the like button, comment and subscribe. See you next video.